Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today I'm going to be doing a solo episode on a topic that's been around in the U.S. now for almost exactly 1 year. Now, many of you probably remember what happened a year ago in the U.S. It was the first case reported and confirmed of H5N1, a strain of avian influenza in dairy cattle in the U.S. I was debating whether to do an episode on this because there's a lot of information out there. Probably a lot of it might not even be very accurate because there's still a lot that's unknown about this virus in dairy cattle, especially in the U.S. But I finally have come to do it at this 1 year anniversary. One of the big reasons that I decided to do an episode on this is because I have personal experience dealing with this virus in my own dairy herd. Back in May of 2024, May 2, I believe it was the exact date, we had our first cow break out with H5N1. Now, it's definitely not something that I wanted to publicize or get out there or put out on social media with all of the things up in the air at that time around how it could affect milk, how it could affect cows, how it could affect people. We didn't really know much at that point, at that stage in the game. We're 5 weeks into the very first case when we got it here at my farm in Western Michigan. Now, let's back up and look at things across the U.S. So here we are, end of March 2025, and we've had roughly 1,000 herds in the U.S. with confirmed cases of H5N1. Now, many of us know there's probably a lot of herds that didn't report early on before all of the bulk tank testing happened. There were many people that didn't understand why their cows were dropping in milk, why they would have to report this, why they would want to report this. So there was a lot of confusion around how much this was actually affecting farms when it first broke out in March, April, May of last year. Now, each dairy herd that has had it seems to act a little differently in how they recover, what the impact was on their milk production, on feed intake, all of the things that go on with a cow on a daily basis from a health standpoint. So as it stands right now, confirmed cases in the U.S., there's 17 states that have had confirmed cases of H5N1. California led the way so far at over 750 herds out of roughly 950 herds in the state that had confirmed cases. Colorado is second with 64. Idaho is third, 36. Michigan has over 30. As I know, there's probably many more than that occurred in Michigan. That was back early on that we had it, where there wasn't as much testing going on. So there's a couple different aspects of this whole ordeal that I wanted to walk through today. Number one, my personal experience that I had with it, how it affected our herd, some of the things that we did to mitigate it, and some of the after effects that we had. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the mental health side of when anything like this hits, whether it be bird flu or a natural disaster that might hit your farm or a drought or any big event that stresses a farmer. I think this is a very important topic to talk about. There's several of my Nuffield Scholar colleagues that have taken this topic to research and look at how these things impact us as farmers on a regular basis. From a mental and even physical standpoint. We all know that the more stress we have, the harder that is on us physically as well. So let's start out on the farm side of things. As I said, there's a lot of almost 1,000 farms in the U.S. now that have had confirmed cases. I know we've seen reductions in milk production in large dairy states like California, up to 10% month-over-month reduction. At one point, I think it was last fall, that had occurred when they were in the height of their infection. Now, for our farm, We had 3 cows the first day that came down with bird flu. At the time, we thought it might be pneumonia. It looked very similar to that. Cows had extremely high temperatures. They were still ruminating, but you could tell they were going downhill very fast. So we treated them like it was pneumonia. And then the following day, we had 5 more cows that showed signs of this. The original 3 did the day before. So at that point, we had heard about H5N1 in the news. We knew it was in Michigan. We knew it was starting to become prevalent in our area. And we figured, okay, this is probably it. So at that point, we had the vets come in and do some testing. And sure enough, we had H5N1. And from there, it was just like a domino effect. So we have 2 different barns, milking barns on our farm. We milk with robots. So at that point, once we knew what it was, we didn't move any cows from either barn. They would stay in that barn. We weren't gonna shift any cows around because we had it in one barn. We didn't have it in the other barn. So we went through, and it seemed like every day we had 4 or 5 new cows that were infected in our main milking barn. And it took 2 weeks before we saw a single case, our first case, pop in our second milking barn. So why did it spread to that second barn? We still don't know. Cows weren't moved. Milk didn't touch from one barn to the other. Manure, we used the same equipment to scrape manure. So that might've been one thing. We had a lot of birds, a lot of pigeons around at that time. So how it spread, we still don't know to this day, but it was really interesting. I thought that one barn had it for 2 weeks before we even saw the first case in the other barn. But that just prolonged it. We were dealing with sick cows that were sick, cows that were new sick cases for over a month time frame. And that was frustrating to say the least, to see a great herd of cows just continue to go down and down and down. And I know many dairy farmers out there have dealt with this, and it's just a really tough thing mentally to deal with when your cows are performing well. One thing I didn't mention, 2 days before our first cases of bird flu hit, we had our record milk production on our farm. So that was even more salt in the wound. That made it very, very difficult when we were doing such a great job. Things were going so well on the farm, and then that hit. It wasn't like our cows were stressed to the max from heat stress or anything like that. The weather was great. The production was great. Cows were doing really well. So as I said, the first 3 cases that we had the first day, we treated as pneumonia cows. And those treatments didn't seem to do anything for the cows. So after that, we decided we're going to try to get the temperatures down on the cows by giving them aspirin and then pumping them with cool water. So we do a lot of pumping. We have a great little hand pump here that I've had for a while now. And we use that thing every day a lot during this whole infection period. We would pump cows. If they looked at us cross-eyed, we'd pump them. Now, the great thing that we have is our robot software system and the activity collars on our cows. So we use that really to manage as cases were coming in. We could see drops in rumination, but even before we saw the drops in rumination, we saw spikes in temperature that were extremely high. These were some of the highest temperatures our vet of 30 years have ever seen in dairy cows that didn't die right away. We were seeing temperatures consistently at the 106 mark. We even had one cow that registered over 108 rectal temperature, which nobody believed until I actually took a picture of it. So these cows were really burning up from the inside. And the other thing that we noticed was every cow that seemed to be infected and ill with this virus had one quarter that seemed like colostrum milk, or where they basically almost dried up in that quarter. But first it turned to like a very stringy, thick milk. Now we would treat cows usually for a couple of days by pumping them, giving them vitamins as well, and rumen boluses to try to keep their rumens going. And we actually did not see a huge drop in feed intakes during this time. So that was one thing that I know several neighbors several people that I know in Michigan that had it experienced extreme drops in bunk feed intakes. We did not see that. I think the most we dropped was about 5 to 8% in our bunk, whereas I know several other farms that had 20 to 30% drops in their feed intake. So our ruminations did drop, but I think with the early detection that we had, we were able to keep them somewhat ruminating and get them through quicker. But we still weren't able to collect some of the milk, and it still took them a while to come back to their milk production. Now, typically it was about 30 to 45 days for the cows that were infected, that we could see on the computer that were infected, to come back to full milk production. We lost about a little over 20% of our total production right when it first hit. So we got to the middle of June and it seemed like, okay, we're getting back on track. Things are getting better. And at that point, we weren't getting any new cases, but the cows that had recovered, we started seeing issues with. And from there, really from the middle of June all the way until the beginning of December of 2024. So what is that? Roughly a 5-month period. We had a lot of animal health issues that we've never experienced before on our farm. So we had a lot of cows that got sick again, that with other things, they tested negative, but they had gotten other things and their immune systems, like they were a cancer patient that had radiation and chemo, and you threw them out in the mall at Christmas. It was really bad. We ended up losing quite a number of cows we just couldn't save. And our cull rate for those 5 months was double what it usually was for the last 3 years. So that was really hard on us with replacements being harder to find, with the replacement cost being much, much higher than what we were used to try to rebuild our herd on the cows that we lost and the extra cows that we had to cull that we had issues with. Now, the other thing that we saw too was cows calving in again, ones that we had dried off, that either we dried off early because they had the bird flu and didn't have any milk production, and we just dried them off, or cows that had recovered from bird flu a little bit later, and then we dried off, once they were set to dry off, and we calved those cows back in. Now, they calved in fine, didn't have any issues calving in. They'd get it to about 7 to 10 days in milk. They'd be going up nicely and didn't have ketosis. And then all of a sudden, they'd just drop in production to around 30 to 40 pounds of milk, and they would just sit there and flatline. They wouldn't get better. They wouldn't get worse. They would just sit there. And we had vets out multiple times looking at those fresh cows, and they would say, there's nothing wrong with this cow that I can find. They just wouldn't produce milk. So we had that with quite a number of cows, and those were some of the cows that we called later on toward that October, November, December timeframe as they calved in. That cows that we knew that had bird flu, because I kept track of every single cow that we had treated for bird flu or that we knew had been affected by it. And we had a lot of cows freshen in that just did not take off. They took off for about a week and then just stalled out from there. So that was really disappointing. It just was one thing after another for basically a 6-month span where we were dealing with health issues on cows, losing cows. And that was one thing we've always prided ourselves in here is a low call rate, being able to take care of our cows, being on top of health treatments on our cows. So it was really, really frustrating from that standpoint. The one thing I want to touch on is the different levels of government that were involved with the H5N1 issue. We had some USDA federal level vets on our farm. We gave them access to the information that we were tracking during the outbreak of the virus so they could see how our cows responded, some of the issues, and hopefully dig up some answers to why it was spreading. That was early on back in, I believe it was May and June of 2024. I was really happy with how those USDA vets worked with us. They were very, very gracious, understood the mental pressures that we were under, and did a good job from the standpoint of collecting information and trying to have a realistic conversation with us on our experience and looking at the information they needed on the cows. Now, one thing on the federal level that I was really disappointed with is I looked at some of those programs that came out to help farmers that were dealing with H5N1. Some of them were absolutely worthless in how they were put together. They basically did a cookie cutter of the poultry industry program and said this is for dairy farms when it has very little to do with dairy farms. There's very little to compare to. So some of those early programs that rolled out were very poorly put together. And I think they realized that over time and they came up with a few different things that were helpful in the long run. As well as our state, I think a state level did a good job with some of the programs they put out to help dairy farmers that were willing to give information and do some research type projects on the farm to give them some revenue for that information. Now, one thing I was really disappointed in, and this is probably going to be very controversial, so I'll probably get a bunch of hate mail for this, but we had an outbreak in the center part of the state originally when it started in Michigan. It hit a very large poultry operation there that I know, and it's just devastating to them. And they have a lot of birds, and the state directed them to dispose of the birds that had been euthanized or died at a landfill. Well, the landfill that the state decided to bring them to is about a mile from my farm, and it is surrounded by dairy farms and surrounded by poultry operations. Our county is known for being the largest county in the state, probably one of the largest in the Midwest for turkey operations. So as you can guess, bringing infected dead animals into a landfill surrounded by poultry and dairy farms probably is not a very wise thing to do. They have not officially said that it had anything to do with the outbreak we had in our county, other than our outbreak in our county occurred right after that disposal happened. Within the incubation period of that disposal happening, local dairy farms got it, and then poultry operations, and it was just a domino effect. And it had a huge economic impact in our county. Now, this is one thing that I was very frustrated by, and pretty much everyone in our county was really frustrated by how the state responded and disposed of these birds. And it still hasn't been officially resolved. I think there's a lot the state can learn from how they respond to an outbreak like this and how they should dispose of dead stock in the future that are known to be infected with a virus that is very contagious. I'm really hoping that some good comes out of this because, like I said, impacted our county economically at a large scale. And my own personal operation as well, this has cost us a substantial amount of money between the lost milk production that we've had, the lost animals that we've had, and trying to replace them. We haven't gotten back up to our full numbers and our full production level in almost a year now from where we were at. That leads into my last part here that I want to bring up about mental health. Now, that's a topic that most farmers do not want to talk about, especially when you're going through a very stressful event like an outbreak in your livestock herd, or an extreme drought or extreme floods, or other things that will financially impact and could potentially be the thing that shuts your operation down, shuts your livelihood down, makes it so you cannot provide for your family anymore. Now, as we were going through this whole outbreak and dealing with the ramifications of it, I did take a bunch of videos, I think one every 3 or 4 days throughout the event, and as a way just to document what was going on, how I was feeling as a farmer. When you see cows getting sick left and right, when you see cows dying that you're responsible for, it makes you feel like crap. And no matter if it's your fault or not, you still feel like crap when you see great animals being affected the way they were. So I just want to say to every dairyman that dealt with this, every poultry operation that dealt with this and is still dealing with this, I really feel for you. I understand what you're going through. And I think it's just important to understand that you need to take time and talk about these things with people that you trust. Just tell them how you're feeling. Tell them what you're going through. To me, my faith is very important to me. It's a foundation of why I do what I do, and it's a foundation of how I live my life. So I think that foundation, that grounding that I have was what allowed me to get through this ordeal and still keep my sanity, still maintain my relationships with my wife and my kids. I spent a lot more time praying and reading the Bible and just trying to find purpose in what I was going through. And I believe that might be part of the reason why I'm talking on this episode today. I felt like now is a time that somebody out there probably needs to hear this, and somebody needs some encouragement. You will make it through an ordeal like this, even if you end up losing your farm. You are not your farm. And I think that's an important thing as farmers. We need to decouple that we are not our farms. We are our own person. And even if something happens to the farm, that does not mean our life is over. That does not mean we lost our purpose. Just remember that. I think that's very important to keep in mind. I think that was one of the things that really helped me through this situation. Now, I had a lot of people to thank that helped me through as well. Friends, family members, people that I talked to in the industry. I'm not going to name names, but I don't want to get them in trouble. But I think it's important to have a great network of people as well as a good foundation to help you through mental stress and mental hardships in your operations and in your career. We're all going to have this, whether you have a farm or a career, a family. There's always going to be stressors in life. And in the end, it's all about how you respond to it. How are you going to take that issue? How are you going to take that challenge? And how are you going to use it for good to build you up, to build others up, and encourage others? So sorry about all the ramblings today. I know it was just me talking about my situation. If you do have a situation that you're going through that you feel like you need somebody to talk to, please reach out to me. I'm more than willing to help you. And I also have a lot of connections because of this great AgCulture Podcast community that can help with mental health issues or stressor issues. So reach out to me. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe and share it with somebody that you know. That's how we grow our audience, as always. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast. Thanks for listening.